In 1974, food scientists cracked open a can that had been sitting at the bottom of the Missouri River for 109 years. It came from a steamboat called the Bertrand, which sank back in 1865. The metal was rusted, the label was long gone, but when they tested what was inside, it was still safe to eat. No bacteria, no spoilage, just food that had quietly outlasted the Civil War, 2 world wars, and the entire 20th century. That's not a survivalist myth, that's a documented case study. And it raises a question most people never actually ask. If a can can survive over 100 years underwater, what could the right can survive sitting in your closet? Today, I'm breaking down 10 canned foods that can realistically last 30 years or more, based on USDA storage guidance, university food science research, and manufacturer shelf life testing. Some of these you probably already have in your pantry without knowing their true shelf life. Others are foods almost nobody stocks, and one of them, number 7, surprises even people who've been prepping for years. Stick around for that one, because it's the item most expert lists completely leave out. Before we get into the list, hit subscribe if you're into practical, no-nonsense preparedness content. No fear-mongering, just what the research actually shows. And drop a comment telling me how many of these 10 you already have stocked. I read everyone. Let's get into it. Number 10. Canned pinto beans. Let's start with something almost every household already has. Researchers at Brigham Young University ran a long-term storage study on pinto beans and found that beans stored properly could remain acceptable for up to 30 years. In their taste panel, more than 80% of testers said decades-old beans were still perfectly fine to eat. That's not a marketing claim from a prepper company. That's an academic study. The catch is packaging. This 30-year figure applies specifically to beans sealed in number 10 cans, or heavy-duty Mylar bags with the oxygen pulled out, not the small tin of beans sitting in your grocery store. The Utah State University Extension backs this up too, noting that beans in oxygen-free, sealed industrial-sized containers can last 10 or more years even under average conditions, with the BYU numbers showing just how far that can stretch under ideal ones. It's also worth noting what acceptable actually meant in that study. It wasn't just technically edible. The test panel was judging taste and texture, and the vast majority still rated them fine to cook with. That's a meaningfully higher bar than simple food safety, and it's part of why dried beans in sealed cans are considered one of the most cost-effective long-term staples in the entire prepping world. A single number 10 can of dried pintos costs a fraction of what a comparable amount of freeze-dried meat runs, and it holds up nearly as long. Number 9. Canned salt. Salt doesn't spoil. Full stop. It's a mineral, not an organic material, so there's nothing for bacteria or mold to actually feed on. Historically, salt was so valuable as a preservative that colonial-era households used roughly 40 pounds of it per person, per year, just to cure meat before refrigeration existed. If you can that salt properly in a can and keep moisture out, you're looking at a shelf life that's genuinely indefinite. The only real enemy is humidity, since salt will clump or absorb moisture from the air over time. Keep it dry, and it will outlast you. Number 8. Canned honey. Honey is famous in survival circles for a reason. Archaeologists have found pots of honey in Egyptian tombs thousands of years old that were still edible. The reason is simple chemistry. Honey has almost no water content and is naturally acidic, which makes it an incredibly hostile environment for bacteria. When honey is sealed in a can, rather than left in an open jar, you also remove the risk of moisture creeping in over time, which is really the only thing that causes honey to eventually crystallize or ferment. Store it in a cool, dry place, sealed, and honey is one of the few foods on this list with a shelf life that isn't measured in years at all. It's measured in centuries. There is one thing to watch for, and it's not a safety issue: crystallization. Over time, especially in cooler temperatures, honey's natural sugars can separate out and turn the whole jar or can grainy and solid. That's completely normal and doesn't mean it's gone bad. A warm water bath will usually bring it right back to liquid form. The only real threat to canned honey is if moisture somehow gets in and dilutes it enough for fermentation to start, which is exactly why a sealed can, rather than a jar that gets opened and closed repeatedly, is the more reliable long-term option. Number 7. Canned, freeze-dried white rice. Here's the one most prepper channels skip completely, and it's honestly the most useful item on this entire list. Regular white rice from the grocery store, even stored well, tends to degrade in quality within a handful of years because it still holds trace moisture and its natural oils can go rancid. But freeze-dried white rice, sealed in a number 10 can, with an oxygen absorber and typically nitrogen flush to remove residual air, is a completely different product. Multiple food storage suppliers and preparedness researchers place its realistic shelf life at 25 to 30 years when stored below 60 degrees Fahrenheit. The reason people miss this one is that most folks assume rice is rice. It's not. The freeze-drying process pulls moisture content down to roughly 1 to 4%, and that's the number that matters. Bacteria, mold, and oxidation all need moisture to operate. Take that away almost entirely, seal it in metal, and you've built a container that can realistically sit untouched for 3 decades and still cook up into a normal bowl of rice. If you're only stocking one carbohydrate for long-term storage, food science suggests this is the one that actually earns the 30-year claim, rather than just marketing language. There's an important asterisk worth mentioning here too, because it applies to this item and several others on the list. That 25 to 30-year window is built on a specific assumption: constant storage at 60 degrees Fahrenheit or cooler. Food storage researchers are consistent on this point. Every sustained increase of roughly 10 to 18 degrees above that baseline can meaningfully shorten the real-world shelf life. A can sitting in a temperature-stable basement is a completely different situation than the same can baking in a garage that hits 90 degrees in July. The rice itself isn't the variable, where you put it is. Number 6. Canned powdered milk. Liquid milk obviously isn't shelf-stable, but powdered milk sealed in a number 10 can with an oxygen absorber is a different story. Preparedness researchers and long-term food storage retailers commonly cite a shelf life of up to 20 years for canned powdered milk stored at cool temperatures, which puts it just under the 30-year mark, but still firmly in outlasts most emergencies territory. The limiting factor here is fat content. Milk powder contains enough residual fat that over very long timelines, oxidation eventually affects flavor even inside a sealed can. Still, 20 years of stable, drinkable milk from a single can is nothing to dismiss. It's also one of the more practical items on this list day to day, since unlike freeze-dried meals, powdered milk doesn't need to be treated as an emergency-only product. Rotating through a can every so often for everyday cooking or coffee, then replacing it with a fresh one, is a simple way to keep your stockpile both current and useful, rather than something that just sits untouched until a crisis forces you to open it for the first time in 15 years. Quick pause. If you're finding this useful, tap that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who are trying to build real food security instead of falling for hype. Now let's get into the back half of the list, including the food the US Army itself tested decades after it was canned. Number 5. Canned sugar. Like salt, sugar is essentially immune to spoilage because it doesn't provide the moisture bacteria need to grow. Refined white sugar sealed in a can, kept away from humidity, has what food safety researchers describe as an indefinite shelf life. The main risk isn't safety, it's texture. Sugar left in a humid environment can harden into a solid brick over the years. But sealed in a can with a moisture barrier, that risk basically disappears. It's one of the simplest, cheapest 30-year plus foods you can stock, and almost nobody thinks to can it properly. What makes sugar interesting compared to almost everything else on this list is that it doesn't need any special processing to achieve that shelf life. There's no freeze drying, no nitrogen flush, no oxygen absorber required, just a dry environment and a container that keeps humidity out. That simplicity is exactly why it's so often overlooked. People assume long-term food storage has to be complicated and expensive, when in reality some of the longest-lasting items are sitting in the baking aisle for a couple of dollars a bag. Number 4. Canned dehydrated eggs. This is one preparedness suppliers specifically manufacture because fresh eggs obviously can't be canned in a shelf-stable way. Dehydrated egg powder, sealed in a number 10 can with an oxygen absorber, follows the same logic as the rice and milk on this list. Strip the moisture, remove the oxygen, and you eliminate the two main conditions spoilage organisms need: Depending on the supplier and storage conditions, canned dehydrated eggs are commonly rated in the 10 to 20-year range, with some cooler stored cans pushing toward the higher end of that window. It's not glamorous, but having a genuine protein and fat source that survives decades is a real gap filler most food storage plans overlook. Most people building a food storage plan focus heavily on carbohydrates, rice, beans, pasta, and forget that a body needs consistent protein too. Dehydrated eggs solve that gap without requiring refrigeration or a generator, which is exactly the kind of practical detail that separates a food storage plan that actually works from one that just looks impressive on a shelf. Number 3, canned freeze-dried meats. This is where brands like Mountain House and Augustin Farms built their entire business model. Meat is normally one of the fastest foods to spoil, but freeze-drying it and sealing it in a nitrogen flush number 10 can changes the equation entirely. Mountain House, for example, uses a vacuum oxygen removal process, combined with nitrogen flushing specifically so that up to 98% of residual oxygen is eliminated before the can is sealed. Manufacturers and independent preparedness reviewers place the realistic shelf life at 25 to 30 years, provided the can stays below roughly 60 degrees Fahrenheit. It's worth being upfront about something here, because balanced information matters more than hype. These 25 to 30-year numbers come primarily from manufacturer testing and accelerated shelf life modeling, not from someone literally opening a can that sat untouched for 3 real decades. Independent long-term verification at that scale is limited. That doesn't mean the claims are wrong. The science behind moisture and oxygen removal is well established, but it's fair to treat the far end of that range as a well-supported estimate rather than a guarantee. Cost is another honest trade-off worth mentioning. Freeze-dried canned meat is significantly more expensive per serving than dry staples like rice or beans, and industry reviewers have pointed out that serving size claims on packaging can be misleading, often assuming smaller portions than a typical adult would actually eat in one sitting. None of that erases the value of having a long-term protein and meal option in your storage. It just means it's smart to calculate real servings and real cost before deciding how much of your budget goes toward it. Number 2, the 46-year-old canned meat the Army actually tested. This one isn't a product you can buy, but it's the proof behind everything on this list. Washington State University Extension has documented that the U.S. Army examined canned meats, vegetables, and jam decades after they were originally sealed and found them in what was described as an excellent state of preservation after 46 years in storage. This wasn't freeze-dried survival food. This was standard commercial canning, done right, sitting untouched for nearly half a century. It lines up with what the USDA itself says. As long as a can is free of rust, dents on the seam, or bulging, the contents inside can remain safe indefinitely, even though the taste and texture will eventually decline. Safety and peak quality are 2 different things, and this is the clearest real-world example of just how far safety can actually stretch. It's worth being fair to the other side of this too, though, because balance matters more than a good headline. The USDA is also clear that this kind of longevity applies specifically to commercially canned goods processed under controlled industrial conditions, tightly regulated sanitation, precise time and temperature under pressure. Home canned food doesn't get the same guarantee, and the USDA actually recommends using home canned goods within about 1 year. The 46-year case and the Bertrand shipwreck food weren't lucky accidents. They were the result of a manufacturing process built specifically to hold up over time. Number 1, canned clarified butter, ghee. The reason this tops the list is that fat is usually the enemy of long-term storage. Most high-fat foods go rancid faster than anything else because fat oxidizes over time. Clarified butter, or ghee, gets around this because the clarifying process removes the milk solids and water content that would normally cause spoilage, leaving behind almost pure fat with nothing for bacteria to use. Sealed properly in a can, away from light, air, and heat, ghee is one of the few high-fat foods that preparedness researchers and long-term storage guides place in the same 20 to 30-year range as dry staples, something that would be impossible with regular butter or cooking oil. It's a genuinely rare find, a fat source that can sit on a shelf for decades and still be usable. If this list changed how you think about your pantry, subscribe, and turn on notifications. I'm building out a full series on real, research-backed food storage, not the exaggerated stuff you see on most channels. And let me know in the comments, which one of these 10 are you adding to your stockpile first? Here's the honest takeaway from all of this. Canned doesn't automatically mean lasts forever, and 30 years doesn't automatically mean guaranteed. What actually determines whether a can survives 3 decades comes down to 3 things: how much moisture was removed before it was sealed, whether oxygen was pulled out or replaced with nitrogen, and how cool and stable the storage temperature stays over time. Get those 3 variables right, and foods like rice, beans, meat, and dairy can genuinely outlast most of the emergencies people are actually prepping for. The Bertrand shipwreck food, the Army's 46-year-old cans, the BYU bean study. None of that is speculation. It's documented, tested, and repeatable. So before you spend money on the flashiest survival food kit with the biggest number on the label, look at what's actually inside the can, how it was processed, and where you plan to store it. That's the difference between food that just sits there and food that's still good decades from now. If you found this useful, there's a lot more where this came from. Subscribe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.